This week's show brought to you by Epoch, which is a word that means a unit of time. Don't worry, we'll discuss it more. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez, and with me, as always, is our producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. Say hey, Brian.
Oh, what's going on, Dre? We're really getting into the NBA season now. Some teams and players are starting to sort themselves out a little, but there's still some pretty interesting stuff going on. So, yeah, I've been really enjoying this NBA season so far.
So I'm going to call this like the improvisation show. We're kind of going without a net. Basically, we don't have a formalized script in place. For those of you that are fans of the show that kind of know the behind the back, usually every week before the show, we have like an online Word document. We use Google Drive. We put links and stuff up, so we guarantee we know what we're going to talk about. We're not really going to do that this week, but I'll be honest, we're cheating a little. We did have some email back and forth. We obviously had a pre-show we discussed. We have a lot to discuss because the NBA season. That's why we're not as worried about having a formalized script. There's so much to discuss. First thing, completely unrelated to the NBA, as we're going to discuss the word epic. Kind of sounds like epic, like grandiose, big. It's a unit of time. I've always said epoch because it's spelled E-P-O-C-H, and it's very much the classic. I've only seen it in writing in graduate level textbooks, ironically, for like statistics. But it's epic, which means a unit of time. And I have mispronounced that on the show before, but Brian pre-show caught me. So the more you know. If you've ever tried to use the word E-P-O-C-H, it's pronounced epic. Anything to add on that, Brian? Because it is your note.
It's the most epic unit of time out there, and by that I mean EPIC.
Love it. Okay, so actually what we were going to discuss, this is kind of interesting, and we'll see how it relates, and we'll see how long we go on it, but it's another kind of fun, the more you know thing, is something known as the Betty Crocker principle. And Brian and I, again, we're talking pre-show about it. For those of you who don't know, it's very popular in behavioral psychology, but the notion is, back in the day, 50s or 60s, when they first started creating out-of-the-box recipes, this idea that you go to the store, instead of baking a cake from scratch where I have to put all the ingredients in the pan, I have to top chef it. I just go to the store, I buy a mix, I put it in a bowl, I add a little water. I usually add an egg and some oil. That's if I'm not mistaken, that's the traditional cake mix at the store. Well, it turns out, back in the day, it was literally just dehydrated ingredients. You go to the store, you'd buy a pouch of the ingredients, you'd add water or milk, you'd whip it up, you'd put it in a bowl and put it in the oven, and that was a recipe. The reason we add the egg and the oil now is they found people did not think they were doing enough. It did not count as actually baking. I can go to a bakery and just buy a full cake already made. I can go home and make a cake myself. People apparently did not like if I'm going to bake it, it doesn't count if I use a mixture with just water. So that's why they added, it's a psychological quirk. This is, we love these on the shows. A lot of the flaws that people have, we might talk Hassan Whiteside getting benched in a bit. A lot of random things that coaches do and decision makers in the NBA have to do with psychological flaws that aren't exactly logical. So cake mixes are this way. I brought this up just as kind of a general observation about metrics in the NBA advanced analytics community. There's a line that Bill James used in one of his abstracts back in the day that's been repeated several times. I've seen it on Basketball Reference in 538, where he said he didn't want to optimize to the nth degree, so it kind of eyeballed the values. This is how we got the values for win shares, for per, even metrics like BPM, which I can go all day on like why BPM, Dre, and Dredge, three metrics that use regression, are absolute garbage. And I will at some point, maybe if I get the time. It's just not a lot of fun. It's homework, basically. I've talked about this before, Brian, where explaining why somebody else's work is bad really is a lot of work, especially if they haven't put in I'm going to repeat the word work. I'm repeating something I've said years ago. This is really striking a bell to me, Brian. But it's not a lot of fun to criticize somebody else's work when you have to put in a lot of homework to explain it. But essentially, a lot of regressions, a lot of the box score metrics we see that are popular, people feel they kind of have to add their own spin, their own twist. And I was commenting to Brian pre-show, that's essentially the Betty Crocker principle. People are not comfortable with, I'm just going to take the numbers, I'm going to run a standard regression the correct way on them and get out a player's value, which is, for instance, why we like the ones produced. which for the most part does it. There are some other areas that we've discussed ad nauseum, might discuss more on the show, Brian, that you can tweak it to your liking. But people don't tend to like that. People don't tend to just like taking the numbers, the box score numbers at face value. They have to add their own spin, right? Surely more shots is more valuable. Surely there's some defensive thing about fouls that's more valuable. We've never really been a part of that. But like I said, there is a very common psychological quirk. Look it up. I believe the way I've heard it, there's probably another phrase for it, a more official phrase for it, Brian. But I've heard it described as the Betty Crocker principle, which is people do not like things being too easy. They have to put in a little bit of work. And the egg and the oil is just enough to make it the amount where people feel comfortable.
And that's great. I'm glad you brought that up. I'd never heard of that before. We showed an article from Psychology Today on screen that was describing that. So that's pretty cool. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think one other side of it, from the metrics perspective anyway, the NBA metrics, and I've definitely talked about this on the show before too, is that I think it's a function of the industry of online journalism, basically, the way things go. And by that, I mean their workflow is they need to churn out articles at a regular basis. And their editors are going to say they need to be about certain subjects. And I think just coming up with new metrics for the sake of coming up with new metrics is part of the day-to-day business of the internet, and that's why it happens. So anyway, that's really interesting stuff.
Also, it is the point. We bring up wrestling a lot on this show. And by the way, Brian, I don't know how much you've got your ear to the grindstone.
On wrestling?
Yeah.
A little bit.
I haven't as much, especially because all of my favorite personalities left What Culture. And that used to be a place that I would watch a lot. So I'd kind of like, this is the geekiest thing ever, Brian. But it's like, I've listened to podcasts on movies that I have no intention of seeing. Or movies that I am interested enough in that I'm like, I don't want to waste the 2 hours on the movie, but I want to know the basic plot and I want to know some people talk about it. So I've gotten to that point. There are great YouTube channels, great podcasts that break down things that I don't want to watch because I don't think their quality is going to be good, but I think the analysis will be good. Find it very ironic because I didn't like English class a lot in high school, but apparently it was just the subject matter. Apparently 18th century British books are boring and I don't give a damn. But if it had been about wrestling, right? If we had been discussing the cadence and wrestlers' promos or the narrative structure, I would have been interested. But so
18th century was epics and epics ago, Dre. I don't care about that era at all.
This show, I'll name it or you'll name it, Brian, but it better have the word epic somewhere in it. But anyway, all I was going to say is Kenny Omega versus Chris Jericho. That just came across my feed, and oh my goodness, I'm so interested in this. I think for Wrestle Kingdom 12. So did this hit any radar for you? No? Yes?
No, it didn't, but I did see a YouTube video of Kenny Omega wrestling like a 6-year-old girl or 11-year-old girl or something recently. That was very entertaining.
That's so old, and I mean...
Yeah, I know. She's probably like 21 now.
So for those of you that like the wrestling part of the show, we're at it. For those of you that don't, we'll be off it soon. But obviously WWE is kind of the monopoly, right? It's the NBA, the NFL. I just almost forgot NHL, right? It's the major league wrestling organization in the U.S. There aren't any competitors anymore, which is a shame. But recently, a lot of other promotions, Ring of Honor, for instance, in the United States, and New Japan have gotten a lot of hype. They, a lot of the commentators like Dave Meltzer have been giving him a lot of praise. Kenny Omega is a big star in New Japan. Chris Jericho is obviously one of the most well-known names. He's got a long and storied career across pretty much every wrestling organization. So that's huge, and I'm really interested in it. But the point I was going to bring in wrestling, if we were logical in a lot of matches, right? Brock Lesnar is a guy that went to the UFC and was a UFC champion. When you compare Brock Lesnar to a guy like AJ Styles, I'm actually using contemporary names. I think they actually have a match coming up somewhere, Brian, but I'm not actually that interested in it. Logically, we know there is really no chance that AJ Styles stands a shot. But what wrestling will do is they'll try and tell some story that makes it seem logical that there is a competition between this. Dave Barry's talked about this. A lot of times numbers in sports are very boring. For a majority of this season, Brian, what we are going to say is the Golden State Warriors are better than everybody else. And if they lose in the playoffs, it was because of luck. That is going to be the narrative. barring, I'm gonna put it out there, barring 3 major injuries.
Oh, that's
Well, I
yeah.
mean,
They crushed the Timberwolves last night without Durant.
People pointed out, and it's not a problem. In fact, we applauded them for this. They were a 73-win team without Kevin Durant. Now, admittedly, Harrison Barnes was obviously not himself, and had they brought him back, they would have hurt themselves. There are players like this, like Andrew Wiggins, a few others I'll have to think of off the top of my head that hurt their team. Right? You have a bad player in your starting lineup, it's going to hurt your team. But the Warriors, without Harrison Barnes, were a fantastic team. Adding Kevin Durant is kind of superfluous, but the reason we like it is if a star on the Warriors goes down, and indeed last season Kevin Durant went down for 20 games, they're able to overcome it. And it's kind of a bummer, actually. He's kind of up there with Adam Baldwin to me, who we talked last week. Taleb, I think it's Nassim Taleb. He's written some great books like Fooled by Chance, Fooled by Randomness, one other, The Black Swan is the one he's famous. He coined the term the Black Swan. In the age of Trump, he's a Syrian refugee that's sitting there being like pro-Trump and anti-everybody else. It's kind of crazy. But he wrote about that in one of the books he wrote was called Anti-Fragile. And this note was there are places that get hurt by random events hurting them. And Anti-Fragile is being able to take a hit and still succeed. And so in the NBA, it's tempting to think we don't need this player, we already have X, whereas the right mentality might be injuries can happen, anything can happen, we want a team as robust as possible, and now the Warriors have that. But
in the business world, this is risk management, basically.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not quite using Anti-Fragile correctly, because the way he's using it is actually like anarchy being your friend, where think of Forrest Gump. In Forrest Gump, a hurricane came through and destroyed everybody's ship, but a Forrest Gump ship survived basically just because Forrest Gump is magic in the story. That was a strategy that let him really succeed, right? Being able to survive a hurricane when everybody else can't means that in the event of a hurricane, you are much better than everybody else. So it's not quite that way. You're right. It really is more risk management. It is more redundancy built in. But that is the key, and that's what makes the Warrior story boring. So when you're saying everybody needs to, they have these deadlines. You've brought this up a lot. It's one of my favorite points. We have to have a new story up every day, and we have to have a narrative every day. And we have so many narratives we're used to, right? We're all used to the underdog story. We're all used to the Rocky story. I'm actually a huge fan of. I finally got around to watching the most recent Rocky movie, Creed, with. I'm going to get his name wrong. Michael B.
Jordan?
Michael B. Jordan. I almost said Michael B. Johnson because I can't confusing him in my head. But Michael B. Jordan, awesome. Great movie. But there's a fantastic Cracked article where this story is trying to being told as an underdog story. Michael B. Jordan's Creed against the world, when really he's got everything handed to him. He's Apollo Creed's illegitimate kid, but is adopted by Apollo Creed's widow. So he grows up rich. He has a good job. He's able to get into the boxing world thanks to his association with Rocky. He gets a premier fight because of his association to the Creed name. So he's not an underdog, but we want to spin the story that way. So it's the same way, right? In sports, a lot of time, the story is just going to be this team is better than that team. And that's a very boring story. This player is better than that player. This team is better than that team. Putting the two together, this team is better than that team because this player is better than that player. People hate that, which is why we have to be able to spin the narrative of like LeBron James versus Carmelo Anthony, when the reality is that is not a contest. That is not a question. And the only reason for the Cavaliers, candidly, might even be on par with the Thunder this season is not because the Thunder are a good team. It's actually because the Cavs added so many bad players. The Cavs hurt me so much with how many bad players they have.
Yeah, I mean that's a great summary. I'm ready to go to the league standings here and look at that a little bit.
We have to talk a ton about this because there's so many great stories in this. The first team in the standings. Let's go to the Eastern Conference. Top of the Eastern Conference is currently the
Boston Celtics.
Yeah.
They are up to okay, I got to scroll up a little. I don't quite have it on screen, but
yeah, for those of you in the past or not past, for those of you in the future, yeah, as of this recording, I believe the Celtics are 9-2.
They are 10-2 now. They've won 10 in a row after losing their first two, I believe. And the biggest thing,
the first game they lost was against the Cavaliers. It was a nail biter, and it was with Gordon Hayward going down injured. And I mean,
yep.
We've always kind of gone with the good players note, but I mean there is some fairness to saying having one of your starters leave the game early in the game, not only from a motivation standpoint for being ready for it, right? They had no time to prepare for that. So as soon as they got a little bit of time to prepare, oh man, this team's looked amazing.
Yeah, so they won 10 in a row, and the best thing about them is their defense has just been absolutely crushing. They're the only team left that's still under 100 points a game, and they're at 94.6.
So I'm so glad you said that word defense because they're 10-2. I said 9-2. Apologies. Yep. I forgot so we got a lot to talk, but last night they won, but they lost. I don't know for how long. I'll have to look it up. Jason Tatum, I guess he hurt his ankle, and we don't know the state of his injury, at least according to Basketball Reference. I can probably look at another site to find more up-to-date information. But that being said, this team has been absolutely amazing at defense for a variety of reasons. And Kyrie Irving, everybody told me last season, was a bad defender. That was, one of the arguments that made me more comfortable with the Isaiah Thomas, Kyrie Irving trade was the idea that people were pointing at Isaiah Thomas's defense, and I'm like, well, Kyrie's not a great defender either. Yet, lo and behold, this season, the Celtics are the best, the best defensive team in the NBA. So I love that your point on them being the top of the standings, and defense just being this idea that a player is a defensive liability and is going to crush your team. I just don't believe. I never have believed it, and I love having case study after case study to verify my confirmation bias, Brian. But the Celtics are a fantastic confirmation bias this season.
Yeah, well, one stat about Irving is he's getting 3 steals a game, which he's never done in his career. So I don't know if he can keep that up, but maybe he has turned the corner. The main reason I want to talk about the Celtics is that Twitter is just going crazy for them right now, as you'd expect, right? And there's this narrative emerging that, and we love those on the show. We love narratives. Brad Stevens, just a literal god. I saw Matt Moore today, Hardwood Paroxysm on Twitter. He was arguing with people about Steve Kerr versus Brad Stevens and who's a better coach and all that. And so I have a hard time arguing against those people that love Brad Stevens right now. So Jason Tatum and
that's another note I definitely have to shout out using this. So sorry to steal it, and we'll get back to coaching. But Jason Tatum currently, I'm going to call this the Blake Griffin rule. So there was an MVP voter or award voter, I forget which one, but they did not vote Blake Griffin for Rookie of the Year. Blake Griffin, for those of you who don't remember, was like an almost unanimous Rookie of the Year. And his reasoning being Blake Griffin was injured his first year in the NBA right after he was drafted, so he wasn't a real rookie. That was his argument, which is crap. I mean, because of one-and-done rules and stuff and the fact that you can have a rookie that's a rookie in the NBA for voting purposes for Rookie of the Year can be a player that's played 1 year in college or one and done. The rule is you have to basically be 19 and 1 year removed from high school. That's the NBA's rule. So any player in the NBA at minimum is a one and done-ish player by some metric. You can have players that completed their college, right? 4-year college player up to 5 year, right? The NCAA basically says you're allowed to play 4 seasons in 5 years. So you could have a 5th year senior as a rookie. Additionally, you can have players like Luis Scola who play overseas for a really long time and come over when they're close to 30. So rookie just means first year in the NBA according to the voting methods used for the Rookie of the Year metric. So I don't agree with that. But by that metric, the Rookie of the Year this season would be Jason Tatum. Obviously, we think, and this is still backed up, that Ben Simmons is far and away the best rookie this class. But right on his heels is Jason Tatum, which is funny because don't forget, all of us, people were getting mad at the Celtics for trading away that number 1 pick. People were we were in love with Lonzo Ball. And oh man, how hilarious is it that Tatum currently is the best rookie from this year's draft class.
Yeah, and he was a bad college player. And so he was very young in college, and he played for a really good team. Players that are really young and play for really good teams can sometimes, not play as well as their actual talent would indicate. But he looked terrible in college, and he's done really great. Jaylen Brown, same thing. Not a very good college player. He's playing great this year. Al Horford, we've been saying he's overpaid. He probably still is. He's getting pretty old, and I think he's even hurt right now. But he has just been their best player. He's produced 6.1 wins so far through 11 games.
That is nuts.
So Terry Rozier is playing like a star. He had that ridiculous block against Lonzo Ball, I think it was the other day. Everyone on the Celtics has just come out of nowhere and is playing amazing. So either the Celtics just has the most ridiculous GM ever, Danny Ainge, or they just got really lucky all of a sudden, or maybe it was Brad Stevens. I don't know. He's looking pretty good right now.
I do want to say, far and away, I don't necessarily think the Celtics are perfect. And in fact, we've said this a lot. We don't think any NBA franchise, by our numbers, would it takes the curve to give most NBA teams an A. For years and years and years, the Spurs were kind of our go-to. They're our one team, and even they've confused us a little recently. And the Warriors, so damn Nick Young, man. Why? If it weren't for Nick Young, man, we could have given him an A this offseason. But Nick Young, the two big things is they apparently were going to try and play chicken with Steph Curry and his max, and they signed Nick Young. So if it weren't for those two things, we'd be like, aces, you guys are the truth. You know what you're doing. But those two things are even you might not know what you're doing, right?
We'll see if it can hold up, though. So one recent development is Marcus Morris has been hurt. We think he's one of the worst players on the team. He's healthy again. I'm assuming they're just going to put him in there and play a lot of minutes. So
well, and don't forget what ended up happening last game that they did win, although admittedly against a bad team. The Lakers still aren't good. Is Tatum got injured, so it's right. A bad. We were talking about, I think last week, or if not last week or 2 weeks ago, the idea of don't have bad players on the team, and Marcus Morris qualifies. The reason they got Marcus Morris, I believe, was they traded Avery Bradley, who we thought, if you thought was a good defender, which again we just talked about who freaking knows, right? If you thought Avery Bradley was a good defender, we thought he was a close to average, maybe above average player, but they traded him for the cap space at the time before anything else to afford Gordon Hayward. We were like, perfect. That is a perfectly reasonable move. But they got a bad player back in return, and our argument is never get a bad player with a reasonable contract. And by reasonable, what I mean is costly. Because if you get a bad player for $2 million a year, teams, traditionally, they have absolutely no problem just buying that player out and showing him the door. But Marcus Morris, I believe, is actually making real money. I don't know off the top of my head. I'll try and look up Spotrac while I'm talking. But we just don't like the idea of having bad players on your team because of this. And the situation that happened is Marcus Morris has been injured. They've been playing great. He basically got extra minutes last game because Jason Tatum went down injured. And now there's the risk that he might keep it. To be fair, actually, he's only $5 million a year for the next 2 seasons. I would just get rid of him, but that's me.
Well, that's a problem with the Celtics roster that we were complaining about going into the year is that we weren't sure if their big men were going to be good or not. It turns out they're looking really, really good, but they just don't have very many of them. So Al Horford is hurt. Jason Tatum is hurt. The only other big man on their roster who's playing even well at all is Aaron Baines. He's been fine, but he hasn't been good in the past. Can he keep it up? So they have the opposite problem of the Warriors, right? They don't have the depth in the front court. I mean, their guards are so good at this point, it probably won't matter. I mean, it looks like they are going to, be in position for a top spot in the playoffs, but that could be an issue for them.
Well, but so there are lots to discuss there. So first, what I do love on defense and the team as a whole. So this is an interesting perspective we've had where we've traditionally said the NBA is a star-driven league and you need a star to succeed. And I still hold by that. There has only been one team that made an NBA Finals without a top 15 wins producer in NBA history, and that was the Knicks in 1999. And that was a lockout-shortened season, so that alleviated a lot of issues. They had some old players on that team, and that was Marcus Camby basically broke out of his shell in the playoffs. So Marcus Camby is a player that we have thought after his career is a great player, but he kind of didn't really show who he was until that playoffs. So even that's kind of a mirage. It's up there kind of with the 2001 or two, whichever Lakers kind of looked worse in the regular season and had worse going in. They were beat up and injured going into the playoffs, but then they were fully healthy in the playoffs and they did great. So same kind of idea, kind of a mirage. But there really hasn't been an NBA team that's won a championship without a great player. And a big part of that is it's just, you run out of space, right? If I'm trying to compete, we've talked lots of metaphors. Ping pong, you had your great mahjong duel from the Gambler movie that was the title of a show a few weeks back. This idea that you're basically competing against an opponent. You're saying, I have this player, they counter, we counter. You run out of space without a star that's just 2 to 3 times as great as an average NBA player. But the Celtics basically are still starless, right? Gordon Hayward would have qualified, so that's going to be really interesting. If he comes back healthy, certainly he's going to be, but for what it's worth, that was a pretty bad injury. So this could very much be, I just dropped his name, played for the Suns, Grant Hill. Could be a Grant Hill, just never comes back. So here's hoping. But they have made a very good team. They just have a bunch of really good players. And that works for defense, right? That's always been our point, right? Defense is a team activity. So you can have a bunch of good players that understand the defense. That does well for defense. That does well for making a winning team. And they are now, luckily enough, in the situation to be in a conference where that might take them to the finals. We haven't really seen this. I don't really expect them to compete against the Warriors doing this. But I've also argued I hate that reasoning, right? I hate we have no shot at a title, because all that has to happen, and this already happened once, is they make it to the finals, and let's say Draymond Green falls over in the middle of a dirty play, runs into Steph Curry's leg. Do you remember the movie Cool Runnings?
I do, and I remember the actual event even more. That was kind of scary.
Well, I'm not talking about the event in real life. I'm talking about
the actual movie. Yeah.
I'm talking about the made-up event. So in the movie, what happens is they're doing qualifiers for the Olympics. 3 sprinters. One guy falls over. As he's falling over, he falls into 2 guys, and they fall over, and all 3 of them fall over and don't qualify. For whatever reason in the story, they don't rerun the race or anything. You think they would, but it's narrative. It's not. That movie is not true, right? That is not.
So
how
the sprinters had to become bobsledders after they failed at the race.
Because, well, again, we were just talking this for sports, right? You can't just tell the truth, apparently. You can't say this team that was better than that team won with this good player playing better than that player. You have to try and make up some kind of narrative. Carmelo Anthony dominated the ball with 30 points, but it came up short against the Cavaliers, even though they lost by 20 or whatever. So same thing in Cool Runnings. Had to make up a narrative to sell the story that wasn't the truth in reality. But all I was going to say there is that kind of situation can happen, right, in the playoffs. 3 players on the Warriors get injured for a couple games, and that happened, right? Andrew Bogut, Draymond Green got suspended, Steph Curry was injured. That was just enough to put the Cavaliers over the top. We saw the Clippers, who we thought were amazing with like Chris Paul and Blake Griffin. Both of those players go down in the playoffs in a subpar, right? That Clippers team, it's such a shame what happened with them with Blake Griffin, Chris Paul, and DeAndre Jordan. That is a legit top 3 for a contending team in the NBA. And, they underperformed in the playoffs, but part of it is injury. A middling Portland Trailblazers team managed to beat the Clippers. So we have seen in the playoffs great teams, historic teams, right? The Spurs as well, have been the number 1 seed and fallen to the 8th seed or fallen in the playoffs to worse teams. We've seen this happen. We haven't seen it in the finals. But this year could be the year where the Celtics get a good, not great team to the finals and a little bit of luck and they can win it. So, it's funny where I'll agree that they're not really a contender yet compared to the top of the West. But there's nothing to say that can't happen because we've seen that situation happen in places other than the finals.
Yeah, so I'm interested. Okay, so what you said is really interesting about the how they don't have real stars, right? They just have these good players. So the Stevens angle is very interesting to me. I'm bringing up all their defensive stats right now on Basketball Reference. So, just what are their league ranking in these stats? So,
Are you 4 factors or shooting?
I'm looking at 4 factors. So fouls right now. So they are down 21st in fouls. That is, they're top 10 in not fouling, which is good. Not like elite, but good. Look at their blocks. They're kind of not great in blocks. They're only 24th in the league in blocks. So these are just the box score defensive stats, right? Steals, they're top 10, right? 7th. But again, if you got all this stuff up, is this really adding up to the number one crushing most defensive team? And then the last one I looked at is rebounds. And they're pretty good at rebounding. They're 5th in the NBA. So if you looked at just those box score stats, would you think that they should be way far, far and away number one in defense? I don't think so. So maybe there's something to this Brad Stevens scheme, like that, we think that team defense is related to coaching in a lot of cases. They're just reducing field goal percentage without having all these other, stats to back it up.
So what I'll put this at, I think we've talked about this before, is that's like a Horace Grant player. So Horace Grant is, I don't even think because the Bulls are freaking petty, he's the most underrated player in NBA history. I think it's not even close. He only got like an all-star game once or twice, and that was with the Bulls being amazing with the Jordan and Pippen era. His number's not retired anywhere, despite the fact that if you look at I'm going to make you do this for sure. Just go back to the 90s something. We really need to fix this on the site where you can look up a player without having to be on the season specifically. But Horace Grant is a player that I believe played at 200 wins produced per 48 for 3 different title teams, if I don't recall. Or not 3 different title teams, 3 different finals teams, and then of course he did win titles. So with Chicago from 1991 to 1993, right? Of course they won those 3 titles back to back to back. He produced about 45 wins in that season. He goes to Orlando and produces like over 10 wins produced, and of course don't forget they made the finals. He goes to Los Angeles in 2001, and actually so not quite star level, but he plays +2 points over par for 48. For those that don't remember, points over par is...
He's super old at this point, by the way.
Exactly, but that's how many... If my player played a full 48 minutes on an average team against a completely average team, what I would expect the final score to be. Stars tend to be around 3. Makes sense, right? If you had 2 or 3 stars on an average team against an average team, you'd expect them to like 10 points a game, which is the Warriors.
I like that.
So, Horace Grant is a +2 points over par, not quite a star level, but great, and puts up 8 wins with the 2001 Lakers that go on to win a title. And then by 2004, he's just too old. He's a completely average player, but he retires, as you're pointing out, old as an average player on a team that goes to the finals. So this is a guy that made it to the finals on 3 separate teams, playing great 3 separate times. But if you look at Horace Grant's stats, he is not great at any individual stat. He shoots 54% true shooting over his career. The average big in that time shoots like 53.3. I think like his rebounds are good, not great, right? Like he gets above the average rebound per 48 offensive, actually. So like he's average on rebounds, but above average on offensive rebounds, above average on assists, below average on turnovers, about average on blocks, and below average on personal fouls. So like he's a guy that's good at everything, but not great at anything. And that makes him very deceptive. And it's why he wasn't an all-star. It's why he's not Hall of Fame. It's why his number's not obviously retired, because you've got instead of having a guy that's 2010 monster, you have a guy who's like a 17-9 productive player. And so to what you just said about the Celtics defense, they're basically in the same boat, right? You're saying they're not dominating on you. They're not stealing the ball a billion times. They're not completely shutting people down at the rim, but they're doing enough stuff well that is keeping the opponent from doing well. And we've always pointed out that is the key to winning.
I got one correction here. I was looking at their turnovers on their offense, not the turnovers they've caused before. The turnovers they caused are very similar, though, so I don't care too much. Here's one interesting thing, though. They are not even first place in opponents' field goal percentage. They are third place, I guess, which is still pretty good. But yeah, your point is taken, and it reminds me of an email conversation I had with Patrick this week about Porzingis. We might get to him this show or not, but yeah, I guess these numbers would make me believe, just looking at them casually like we are now, that they'd be like a top 5 defensive team, but not necessarily running away with it. So
I don't know where you're grabbing your numbers, but according to Basketball Reference, they are number 1 on defensive opponent field goal percentage. So they're first in field goal percentage, 13th in turnover, 5th in defensive rebound, 5th in free throws per, out. So
Okay, well, regardless, it's still pretty close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're, I mean,
What
just
number do you have there at curiosity? I have 42.9% for their field goal defense.
I have 47.7 on basketball reference for this year.
Okay. Okay.
This has got to be boring for the people.
We'll figure it out later. But regardless, they are a good defensive team.
Yeah, and I mean, they are a good team, and the question we have like about coaching is it Brad Stevens? I mean, maybe. I think the thing that makes coaching hard, and we kind of talked this on the Cavaliers when they fired Blatt, is that you are really hiring a manager to manage a specific collection of interesting characters, right?
Baseball has the nomenclature correct, you're saying?
So what's baseball?
They are managers, not coaches.
I either term works for me, right? I mean, it's arbitrary, right? It's just a term, right? They don't call managers in the workplace coaches, but
that'd be fun though.
It's the same. Dear God, there's got to be some stupid corporate thing there that thinks they're young and hip because they say coaches instead of managers. But anyway,
life coaches for everyone, Dre.
Life coaches for everybody. But just saying that's their job, and that is not as. I always kind of bristle against the one size fits all. One of my favorite TED Talks, and it's one of the most popular TED Talks of all time, is a Malcolm Gladwell one on spaghetti sauce. And what he noted is there's this guy, I forget the name, so apologies. Look up Malcolm Gladwell spaghetti. It'll have like 3 billion hits at this point because it was one of those things that went viral in the very early days of viral things on the internet. But his point is you would usually have focus groups to kind of decide a recipe. So for things like Pepsi was the start. They had a diet Pepsi, and they're trying to determine how much whatever fake sugar to put in. And what the person doing these studies noticed is it wasn't cut and dried. It turned out it was actually for people that like artificial intelligence. There were clusters. Because people, instead of a one size fits all for everybody, it turns out that people clustered in different groups. So based on who you are, you might like a different level of sweetness in your soda. And so that's what actually this person noticed. Instead of Pepsi putting up one diet Pepsi, they should put out like 4 variants. And I think we're kind of there, right? We have like Coke Zero, Coke, whatever. I don't know the brands.
Yeah, Coke Zero they had to release to be branded for men because men wouldn't drink Diet Coke. That was branded for women. I've always thought that was funny.
God.
I know the flavors are different, like the recipe, but that's my understanding about those two brands.
Yeah, and it's like a black can and all that. That's
exactly.
But so anyway, this person did a very similar study with spaghetti sauce and found the same thing. They found clusters. They found that people didn't all like the same type of spaghetti sauce. They had different people like different things, and you could cluster them enough to release like 4 different types. And that would make a bunch of different people happy, and it's maximizing your audience, right? Instead of making one recipe that everybody's kind of meh with, you make 4 recipes that a bunch of people really like based on your taste. And if you go, like this is the case, right? You go to the supermarket now, and there are a billion different recipes of pasta sauce. That's where this started. I find NBA teams are kind of like that because you're trying to manage. I'm going to use the term manage again, a bunch of differing personalities. And it might not always be the right person for the job, right? Phil Jackson may have been perfect for Kobe Bryant and Shaq and for Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, but who knows how he'd have done on other teams. And, I know the Spurs, for instance, that is one thing they do is they do go for the freaking Silicon Valley culture fit jargon. And it could be the case that, the people they hire have to work well with Popovich. So Brad Stevens looks awesome, and it could very well be that the people they have on the team work well under him, and he's able to get them to buy into defense in a particular style of playing, which I like. I mean, I've got no complaints with that. It certainly seems to be the case, and I'm liking it for a variety of reasons because despite the fact that our normal argument is hire good players, great players tend to be great. Don't get overconfident on below average players. There are certainly the cases where players change. DeMarcus Cousins, for instance, is playing very well in New Orleans right now. And to keep those kind of things in mind, and the only thing I'll say is when you are making those kind of observations and notes about players, to kind of know where you're coming from. So if people want to try and sell me that Brad Stevens is a good coach, that's huge. And what I'll also put out, this is a note from Arturo, American Numbers on Twitter. He noted that for those of us, I'm going to pound our chests, that we're excited about Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah Thomas had an outlier season last season. It was his best career season by far. That was under Brad Stevens, and now he's going to the Cavs. So even if he comes back healthy, who knows what he's going to be.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm still kind of favoring the Cavs at this point. We're only 10 games in. Maybe they'll continue their slide. I don't think we've talked about them too much yet. I don't know if I want to, but it just was pointed out yesterday that they're last in the league in defense right now. I think that was defensive rating, but yeah, they got some work to do, but I'm still not that worried. I'm going to keep saying that.
You're not worried about the Cavs because what I'll say about the Cavaliers is that their issue really is maybe Kevin Love, because Kevin Love's playing pretty well this season, but his minutes are kind of weird. Tyronn Lue, I don't know how he's playing him. Really, that team lives and dies by LeBron James, and the rest of the team is really trash. J.R. Smith, Derrick Rose, Dwayne Wade, Jeff Green. I'm saying this on the night where Jeff Green's going off, but traditionally Jeff Green is not a good player. Channing Frye, and Jay Crowder is not playing well, but who knows? He's not getting the same minutes, not getting played the same rotation, so who knows? They're not a good team outside of really two or three players, and right now Tristan Thompson is injured. So I think there's a very real shot they can fall in the playoffs to some better teams, especially if they don't have top seed. I mean, don't forget last season, they beat the Celtics, sure, but the Celtics played without Isaiah Thomas, who was their best player. And even if you want to make the claim that he was there for one, apparently Isaiah Thomas injured himself in the semifinals and was injured in the finals. So Isaiah Thomas was playing injured into the finals. They never played the full health Celtics, which to our note is why we are saying the Celtics, for instance, may stand a shot in the finals. I'm not comfortable on the Cavaliers, in part, by the way, because LeBron James is playing freaking ridiculous. Do you have his numbers for this season up in front of us?
Oh, yeah, we can bring that up. And, I will say that if they don't have Tristan Thompson in the playoffs, they're not going anywhere. They have to have him.
Well, and who even knows if he's going to get played? So LeBron James, according to the number, is currently the third highest wins producer, with at 3.1 wins produced before tonight. So, and we'll see how he plays tonight. And he is the, let's see, wow, Capella's playing really well. He's top 10 in terms of per minute. Some funny players like Omri Caspi and Salah Mejri are sneaking in there because we have an algorithm that does a cutoff. And because it's so early in the season, it's only 60 minutes, which is nothing. But LeBron James, top 10 per minute player right now, top 5 wins producer right now, and this team is below 500. And I keep harping on it. I'm going to keep harping on it. We have never seen a player at this age with this much mileage play in the NBA. It's never happened. This is the first time in NBA history a player with 50,000 minutes at age 32 has been on a playoff-worthy team. So who even knows how that's going to happen? And even with him playing peak-level LeBron, this team sucks. So I think it's okay to panic if you want to. I think if you want to panic. And to be fair, let's just be mean. It's because the Cavaliers don't know how to sign average players. They keep signing below-average players. And you can only do that. That's one maybe we can sneak into the 76ers a little. The 76ers, I don't care. I'm still, even with how well Simmons and Embiid are playing, I'm sorry, I'm still going to fall on this sword. They still haven't won, right? Because Simmons missed 1 season of his rookie contract already. They had to lose for 6 years to get 2 star players, and they are still a barely above 500 team. You look at the Celtics, right? The Celtics don't have any stars, but the Celtics are in a much better position. Bullshit if you don't think the Celtics have a better shot at making the finals this year than the 76ers. If you're a team that has star players but don't have good players, you aren't going anywhere. And the 76ers, that's the problem, is people think we get 2 star players, we're set. You still need to get 4 or 5 other good players. And if your franchise doesn't know how to do that, you're screwed. And that's the problem with the Cavaliers. The Cavaliers do not have enough good players, and that's just because they kept signing. This offseason, they went and signed Derrick Rose and Dwayne Wade. There's so many better players they could have gone for, and those were the players they went for, and that's what's going to cost them.
Yeah, so I was looking at the 76ers a little bit this week. I'm a little more optimistic on them than I was in the preseason. Well, of course, Ben Simmons.
I'll give it to them. They're playing great.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is Ben Simmons, of course, is playing ridiculous, way better than anyone would have thought, I think. Robert Covington's playing really well out of nowhere. We probably can't expect that to stay up, but TJ McConnell is also playing great, and they're giving him a lot of minutes. He has been good in the past, so if they can find a way to make him, the point guard of the future, I don't know if they have yet. I don't think so. That might be something good to do. They've still got Amir Johnson and JJ Redick. So they're up to 11th in SRS now, and of course that's simple rating system, schedule adjusted margin of victory, and it says 17th here. Well, maybe this is behind. I don't know, but then they were 4th in the East, and the East is obviously much weaker. So I think they're kind of like, well, we could maybe challenge to win one round in the playoffs, but that's their absolute ceiling. Like, they could make the playoffs, but
I don't want to undersell them, but I will note a huge part is we'll see, right? Jason Tatum and Ben Simmons are playing freaking amazing right now, both in terms of minutes played and per minute production. And we have not really seen a player since Chris Paul put on that kind of performance. And in fact, we haven't really seen a player on a playoff team since David Robinson do it on a playoff team. So I'm a little trepidatious because that's one problem. It's like, if you told me preseason you expected Ben Simmons to legitimately be an MVP candidate,
yeah, it's ridiculous.
I would have laughed at you because that just does not happen with rookie players. And even the ones that we've loved, players like Andre Drummond, players like Kawhi Leonard, they were limited in minutes. They have limited scope. So, or they were wasted on a bad team like Chris Paul. So,
or even guys like Fareed and Capella, which draft models said should be in the top of the draft. They took a few years to develop.
Yeah, and so all I'm saying is, if Ben Simmons keeps this up, fan-freaking-tastic. But I'm going to reserve judgment until that happens. Robert, as you pointed out, Robert Covington's playing very well right now as well.
Let me ask you a question about him, Dre. Was he the from that Hinkie dump article, or the Hinkie long screed confession? You remember when that came out? They fired him and then they released his internal email. That was a pretty dick move. Wasn't he the deal-breaking guy? He's like, oh, we had to get Robert Covington, and he wrote about him for paragraphs and paragraphs. I think that was him. So Hinkie liked him for some reason.
I'll have to look into it, but I don't know off the top of my head. So that would be amusing.
Yeah, but another bitter irony pill for him to swallow. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens with this squad, but certainly they are outperforming any realistic expectations you could have for them at this point. And it still cost them a lot. So it's a funny one because even though I'm team Ben Simmons, I actually do want to see the 76ers succeed. Kind of to your point on Sam Hinkie, if this team does succeed, it's going to be on the backs of Embiid and Simmons, and those are Hinkie guys. So even while we were sitting here bashing Hinkie, because for the record, it's the same point. Those 5 seasons where they sucked, they're in the record books. They're not going anywhere. You can't get rid of them. The point I've made before is Kevin Durant, MVP player, Finals MVP player, one of the top 5 greatest shooting players in NBA history. We're going to see him and Curry, right? We're going to see who is going to be very much a Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds-ish race to the finish to see who I think is the better scorer by the ends of their respective.
And we're talking net points right now, right? Points scored adjusted for efficiency.
When you're talking both volume of shots and efficiency of shots, Kevin Durant is something special. He's up there with Steph Curry, Michael Jordan, obviously all the centers that don't get any love in the NBA because people hate thinking that it's easy to be a center in the NBA. The Shaquille O'Neal, Kareem Abdul-Jabbars, Karl Malones, those players deserve way more. That's all I'm saying. He's up there. He's something special as a scorer. We'll see. He sucked as a rookie. He was a horrible rookie. Kevin Durant had a horrible rookie season. Nothing he does now or ever can replace it. He did not deserve Rookie of the Year. He was a horrible rookie. That season is in the books. And so our criticism of Hinkie as a GM, because we thought he did some good stuff and we thought he did some bad stuff, but just the end result is he had many, many losing seasons, and even if they netted him Simmons and Embiid, we did not think they were worth the cost. We have, I keep bringing up the Celtics, you can acquire 15 to 20 wins. It reminds me of that scene in the movie Moneyball. where they've just lost Jason Giambi and they're sitting going, we're not going to get we're not going to get Jason Giambi. Another Jason Giambi isn't walking through the door, but we can replace his X hits and Y home runs and X times on bases. We can replace all of those things. We have to do it among 3 or 4 players. The NBA is like that. You hit a ceiling where, like the Celtics, right? The Celtics to hit the next level are going to need a star player. Maybe one of their rookies, maybe Tatum stays that way because he currently is playing star level. Maybe Kyrie Irving turns into that. Maybe they trade Al Horford for someone. Maybe Gordon Hayward comes back healthy. They've got a plateau with the level of players they've got now, but you can replace Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons' production over 4 years with other players at good contracts. We've seen that in the NBA. But so that's all I'm going to say on the 76ers, and I'm just going to note, yeah, it's a bitter pill because if they succeed, it's going to be because of players that Hinkie picked. And so even if we didn't like Hinkie in the past, we'll say, well, those were Hinkie decisions. So it's like it's the worst of both worlds, right? We're not going to like the current management for what they did, and the players that are doing well, we already bashed the previous management. So it's like it's a lose-lose situation.
Yeah, and my last thing on them is, well, first of all, I was a little bit skeptical of Embiid's, progress this season. I didn't like his numbers as much. They've improved over the last few games. He's only played 8 games out of their 10 games, but his turnovers are down a little bit. They're still really, really high. But if he can get those down a little bit farther, I will be ready to start calling him a star pretty soon. And he's another one of those guys that you just really want to root for based on his personality. So, yeah, I'm rooting for them. And just the last thing on Hinkie is, even if Simmons and Embiid were Hinkie's stars, I'm not, the rest of these guys, like that was his downfall, right? He refused to go get the Amir Johnsons and JJ Redicks of the world.
But no, it's because, right, the logic was, if I want to maximize my shot at players like at Ben Simmons, basically, right? Because he could have gotten Embiid playing a heck of a lot better than he did. In fact, it's pretty obvious what you could have done is you could have made the playoffs, been the 16th or 17th team in the draft, and traded up for Embiid because Embiid fell to like 7th because of injury concern. You could have traded up for Embiid if you wanted Embiid. And even getting Embiid right, I'm still annoyed at the love of Embiid because he's played like 40 games out of a possible like 300. So slow your roll a little.
Exactly.
So that's what I'm saying is his strategy was very clear. To get these players, I have to do this. And I don't agree with that because I think you could have gotten wins. And I think as an NBA team, there is no reason for you not to be in the playoffs every season, barring some, like the Houston Rockets are kind of like this, where they had some years where they were like a 41-42 win team and they were just in the West, where the West is really strong. So out East, if you're a 35 win team, you get to the playoffs. Out West, if you're a 43 win team, you don't. That used to happen a lot. There is no reason for you not to be a 500 or better win team that makes it to the playoffs because, especially, we brought this up many times, the number 8 seed has upset the number 1 seed a number of times in the playoffs now. So you got to get to the playoffs. That's just my general argument. So there's no reason not to get to the playoffs every year or try to that.
And you make a lot of money in the playoffs, which you can just use to buy draft picks if you want more draft picks.
Every playoff game is money. And yet we just saw that, right? You were able to buy Jordan Bell for $3.5 million. Every playoff game is money. Every playoff game is free marketing at people for season tickets and future fans. I discussed
free agents.
And also I guess that's a fair point, right? Players don't traditionally like to go to losing teams. So being in the playoffs, if you're a playoff team and a player is convinced they're a star, you can say, we made the playoffs last year with you. We're a title team. And teams will buy that. But if you go, we were a 26-win team last year with you, they're going to go, even if I think I'm worth 20 wins, we're a 46-win team? We're going to get blown out by the Golden State Warriors. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's all I got on the 76ers.
We talked a lot. I'm trying to think of anything else specifically I have. We've already gone over an hour at this point. I don't know when we started.
Oh, did we start early? Yeah, I guess we did.
So we're already at about an hour. We had kind of said we were going to wing it. The 76ers and the Celtics were plenty to talk about. I guess I'll say check out, the good thing is we don't have to talk this piece because I wrote the article. The Milwaukee Bucks traded for Eric. which I'm a big fan of. I think that actually really helps him out in the East. And that's, to be fair, that's another reason I'm a little trepidatious about the Cavaliers now. You now have another team in the East with a star player, arguably better than Bron, right? Giannis Antetokounmpo is a better player than LeBron James right now, based on age and stuff. And Eric Bledsoe helps that team out. Arguably, if they just, hadn't signed Matthew Dellavedova and actually gave Greg Monroe minutes, they'd be an okay team. But at least this is a team that is going to cut their losses on a player they're not playing. I don't know why they're not playing Greg Monroe, but its ship has sailed, and they're upgrading a position they're really weak at, which is point guard. So I really love this move, and we'll have to see how it turns out. A lot of it hinges on Eric Bledsoe's health.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I love your point in the article that we're showing here that they have put together a pretty good starting five, assuming they play Henson instead of Maker. And Maker doesn't even rebound or block shots. I don't know why they're playing him as a big man. But, yeah, if they figure that out, they could go somewhere. My only concern is just making the playoffs for them. Like, their record and point margin, all that looks terrible right now. Seems a lot worse than it should be. So maybe I don't know what's going on. Maybe they can turn around, but yeah, it's weird how bad they've been considering they have one of the best players in the league and decent other starters.
They need to pick up their defense. So hopefully Eric Bledsoe some out. Although here's just a bit of news. Like Kyrie Irving's an example of this. If you bring a player that's an allegedly good or bad defender to an already good or bad defense, they probably don't move the dial too much. But if you bring a bad defender to a bad defense or a good defender to a bad defense, they probably don't do anything. So I've heard two narratives. I've heard Eric Bledsoe is a lockdown defender. I've heard Eric Bledsoe is not good at defense. He's probably not going to make that defense better on his own. So is what it is.
Yeah, it could be more of a lineup problem.
With how bad that defense is, why didn't they, when they had him, just play Greg Monroe? Because they're already bad at defense. That was the biggest argument I heard against Greg Monroe is his defense, which is an argument I've always hated, right? Enes Kanter is this way in New York now. You have a player.
Oh, I want to talk Knicks next.
Wow.
Oh, are we done? That's fine.
We're going to okay, so Brian, you just took a 3-pointer at the buzzer. You're taking us to OT. We'll talk the Knicks, and that'll be our show. All right, so what do you want to say, Knicks?
Yeah, real fast on the Knicks. I think the Porzingis hype is a little overrated, but I'm still kind of surprised that his production is not as good as it looks. And by that I mean he's the highest scorer in the NBA, I think, right now. I think he has more points per game than anyone.
He might be. Him and Giannis are neck and neck, so I'll take a look and see who's higher. Keep talking.
But his true shooting is up near 60%, and I'm like, wow, how can he just be an average player when scoring is such a big part of your production, and he's been such a great scorer? But he's kind of below average in everything else, especially on defense. And, Patrick pointed out to me that, yeah, all those little things add up. Like, if he's just kind of bad in everything, that can cancel out even his tremendous scoring.
Thanks for letting me get in with this point, because this is a fascinating point, because I'm hating the small ball narrative. The NBA, over the last couple of decades, has gotten better and better and better at effective field goal percentage and true shooting percentage. And so this is not even advanced statistics, but if we're talking Moneyball, the idea is old NBA loved points per game. But if you don't control for shot attempts, that doesn't mean anything. And so like in baseball, hitting percentage was the big statistic. The big key was you had to look at getting on base. So walks were really important. Walks were being ignored. In the NBA, true shooting percentage has gotten better and better and better, which means players and teams have gotten better at getting the ball through the hoop, or a more accurate way to phrase it, the number of points they're getting per attempt. And a huge part of this is 3-point shooting. If like Steph Curry, by the time his career is said and done, he's going to have more threes than many like a collection. You're going to be able to go to multiple teams in the 80s, entire decade, take all of their threes, and Steph Curry is going to have made more threes than multiple teams put together, which is freaking nuts. Or you're going to be able to take a decade of Steph Curry's playing, and his decade is going to have more threes taken and made than like 2 or 3 teams put together in the 80s, which is freaking nuts. This season, the NBA is keeping that up. Last season, their true shooting for the year was about 55%. This season, it is too. But if you look it down, and a way to do it, we don't have a more clever way to do this, Brian, but I'll help you out. If you go to the tools engine at the NBA Geek or Boxscore Geek, so boxscoregeeks.com, It's the tools tab at the top, or you can also do /players/compare. And I'm going to enter James Harden, Otto Porter, and then Clint Capella. The reason I'm doing this is going to bring up, we compare to average. And
for this season only or career?
Otto Porter, I guess, is qualified as this season only. Let's just do this season only. Who's a good wing? I guess LeBron James probably will be called a wing. I'm going to do LeBron James instead. So the 3 players I'm going to do, LeBron James is a big. How am I missing this? How am I messing this up so much?
I don't think he'll be a big by the end of the season. He's been playing a lot of guard, but we'll see.
Who is a good small forward to use as an example?
Someone that's really good at shooting?
Andre Iguodala. Why not? Andre Iguodala has to be. Okay, so I'm going to do James Harden, Andre Iguodala, Clint Capella. Apologies for messing that up. So when you do that, if you go to the comparison engine, enter Andre Iguodala, Clint Capella, James Harden, what you'll notice is we have these 3 columns: average wing, average big, average point guard. And we can hop over to shooting efficiency. And this might actually, it's gotten, Brian, this is crazy. It's gotten worse since I last checked. The NBA true shooting for the season is about 55%. However, if you go to the shooting efficiency tab, look where it's coming from. The average bigs are taking the second most attempts behind point guard, but they're shooting 58.3% true shooting. The NBA's efficiency this season is from bigs. Bigs are crushing the NBA, which is what makes this fascinating. Is you just noted Kristaps Porzingis, we think he's good, not great. Why? Well, it turns out he doesn't do all the other things bigs are expected to do, and the currency of scoring for bigs has gone down. This is something I think is really key and is baked into the wins.
This is really interesting.
The wins per we are a zero-sum metric. We adjust season by season. And this is important because the NBA is zero-sum. It doesn't matter. This is the Denver Nuggets of the 1990s. Were one of the fastest paced teams, one of the highest scoring teams of ever. Why didn't it matter? Because their opponents scored more than them. So right now, when you say, why isn't Kristaps Porzingis and what did you say he was? Let's take a look at. You can use the exact same.
I think it was 59%, but that's only 1% behind the average bigs. So what you're saying is, if you just replaced him with a bunch of average bigs, then they would shoot just as well as him at much easier shots. Probably
he is 2.4% better than the average big, which is
that's significant.
Useful. So you can put Kristaps Porzingis into the same tool, and that is quite useful. But if you look at him, the average big is going to get 9.2 defensive rebounds per 48. Kristaps Porzingis, 9. Average big is going to get 3.2 offensive rebounds per 48. Kristaps Porzingis, 1.9. Average big is going to get 3.2 assists per 48. Kristaps Porzingis, 1.5. Average big is going to get 3 turnovers per 48. Kristaps Porzingis, 3.6, which is bad. Don't forget turnovers are a bad statistic, so more is worse. This is one area he does come up good. Average big's going to get 1.6 blocks per 48. Kristaps Porzingis 3.3. Average big's going to get 4.9 fouls per 48. Kristaps Porzingis 3.9. So he is good at blocks and fouls, but then he's bad at steals. So here's the point. On offense, Kristaps Porzingis is a little better as a scorer than the average big, but he's worse at offensive rebounds, assists, and turnovers. On defense, he's worse at rebounding and steals, but above average at blocks and fouls. So the net result is he is an above average player, but not great. And I was laughing so much because people were bringing up Kristaps versus Giannis, right? Because as you noted, this is NBA 101 classic. Points per game rules the world, right? So Kristaps Porzingis and Giannis are probably going to be vying for the NBA scoring title, which is a dumb metric. It's just points per game by the end of the season. But all you have to look at and say, Giannis, 65.7 true shooting efficiency. And then you go to all of his other stats, above average at defensive rebounds at the exact same bin as Kristaps Porzingis, above defensive rebounds for a big, above offensive rebounds for a big, above assists for a big. His turnovers are high and actually higher than Kristaps Porzingis, but when you factor in the number of assists he gets, that's fine. Above average for blocks, not as good as Porzingis, but above average. Above average for steals, much better than Kristaps Porzingis. And then he's exactly average for fouls. So Kristaps Porzingis beats him there. But given that he's above average at blocks and steals and rebounds, it all averages out. So that's all you have to look at. Kristaps Porzingis is a little better in one category and worse in almost everything in 2 categories. Sorry. So blocks blocks and shooting, basically, as Kristaps Porzingis. Giannis is basically above average at everything except for turnovers, which as soon as you factor in that assist and touch factor, I think becomes kind of a non-problem.
Oh, I love it, Dre. That was awesome. And here's my final point on the Knicks, which your Cantor comment made me go to that. Cantor has been their best player this year. He's been absolutely dominating. And everyone says, well, he's terrible at defense. He's a one-dimensional player. He only just shoots and rebounds. Well, he's really, really good at those things. He's averaging 19.9 rebounds per 48. That's got to be up near the league lead. There are a couple guys at 20. And he's similar to Giannis. He's at 66.8 true shooting. O'Quinn is also a really good big man for the Knicks. He doesn't play as many minutes, but he's been good too. So, yeah, their big men have been carrying them this year so far.
Yeah, and I mean that is the key. When this is the Brian. We'll end the show on this, Brian. The Brian keyword, which is magnitude. When you are asking why a player is good or bad, you have to ask, what do they do well and how much that matters? And the problem is, in traditional NBA, people just look at points per game and give it no context. And what we are saying is, Kristaps Porzingis is good at points per game and blocks per game, but relative to everything else he does and how good he is at those things, it is not enough to make up for his deficiencies. Whereas if you look at a player like Giannis or Cantor, in Giannis's case, he's just really, really good at scoring and he's really good at everything, right? Giannis is freaking amazing. I think if Milwaukee can get its act together and Bledsoe can help him out, he will be a legitimate MVP candidate. I'm not sold that Westbrook changed things. I would like to Westbrook.
You mean in terms of team records for MVP?
So yeah, the classic record problem for MVPs was, this is Kevin Garnett, right? If you're a great player but your team is a 40-win team, you're not going to win the MVP. It's just not going to happen. It used to basically be you had to be a 52 or 53 win team. That was kind of the floor to have any shot at winning the MVP. And the reason I bring up those floors is the two players that managed to kind of break the 55 win season in terms of winning the MVP were Steve Nash and Michael Jordan. And Steve Nash did it after they lost Amari Stoudemire. So there was a narrative, and they still did freaking amazing, still won like 53 games. And then Michael Jordan did it in a season where he led the league in scoring points per game by 5 and won Defensive Player of the Year. And so Westbrook actually kind of falls into that category. Last season, Westbrook won MVP on a mediocre team, but he did it averaging a triple-double for the season and leading the league in points per game. So I would like to believe that if Giannis keeps up his performance, he stands a shot at MVP. But unless he does something crazy, I don't think it's going to be enough to rattle the voters if the Bucks stay mediocre.
Yeah, Bledsoe's going to have to improve them. Yeah, we'll see. And just, to back up that point, we were looking at the Boxscore Geeks, top win producers a little bit earlier. I'm showing Arturo's right now with his metrics that are slightly different but very similar, from his Twitter account today. It's pretty much the same as what we have, slightly different order, but these are mostly big men up here in the top 10. He has Anthony Davis number 1, Capella number 2. We have Curry and LeBron, of course. We talked about them, but Jokic, Drummond, Gobert, they're all up there having great seasons. So yeah. Big man, DeAndre Jordan as well. He's not on this Arturo's top 10 list, but he's having a great year too. Trust me. Big men are having a great year.
Yeah, it's so funny, and I mean we mentioned this last show, and it's just worth repeating. The NBA is a star-driven league, which means like the top 20 players in the league kind of dictate its direction. So I hate when people say it's small ball now just because the title team plays small. And again, the Warriors are not a small ball team with Kevin Durant. I'm going to keep harping that. Sorry.
Can I throw out a crackpot theory, Dre?
There you go.
Here's my crackpot theory with no evidence. I just thought of it now. Because teams are playing more small ball, the real big men get to dominate more because of diminishing returns. They are crushing these small people.
I will not confirm Brian's crackpot theory, but I do appreciate that you said crackpot first without giving it some look. But yeah, I mean, the history of the NBA has been talented big men rule the NBA, and the players like Steph Curry are anomalous. Even players like Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant were above average in height for their relative position. So the NBA has traditionally been a fan of big men that perform well. So,
and I will disagree with you slightly there. Steph Curry plays pretty big for a point guard. He's one of the best rebounding point guards.
I'm saying he Steph Curry is actually a Tyrannosaurus Rex in that he's actually, if you look at his wingspan and size, it's very short relative to what you would expect. So, yeah, Curry is an anomaly because some of the shorter players like Dennis Rodman and Charles Barkley that were short players and known for being short despite being great rebounders and great defenders, they had monstrous long arms. They had pterodactyl arms. Steph Curry has short arms, is a short player, and yet somehow, as you mentioned, still manages to play tall, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But he is the anomaly. He is not the norm.
To use the eye test, he grabs rebounds sometimes when you can't see him. Like he's so in traffic that he's just like covered up by everyone else, but he just comes down with it. What a guy, Steph Curry. All right, well, that's everything I have on that.
Let that be our show. We got to talk 3 teams and talk a ton. You got, I think, 4 or 5 behavioral psychology things in there. So that has been it. I think you had one shot. You had a good shout out. I love this shout out. I'm going to steal it and just say it's the show shout out. I'm going to let you do that, and I'm going to say that's our show.
Yeah, so I'll sneak in a shout out I didn't tell you about real fast because it's big esports news. Complexity Gaming, which is one of the most old school teams in esports. Jason Lake's been running that team for over 20 years at this point. They got bought by an ownership group led by Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys recently. And, obviously Jerry Jones is in the news for some other kind of stuff recently. Maybe he's not a very good guy, but for esports overall, this is a pretty big thing. Like this, one of the biggest teams and in the NFL getting involved. It's one thing like Rick Fox, a retired NBA player, getting involved. And we've seen some ownership.
I feel with Rick Fox's last name, he had to do what he did, which is amazing. Because what's the name of his team?
His team name is Echo Fox, and their logo is an actual fox, like an animal. So it's pretty cool. So anyway, that's some esports news. We'll see what happens there. But the shout out that I really wanted that you were talking about, and we missed this a few weeks ago because we weren't taping shows, trying to do all the preseason articles. Excuse me. Friend of the show, former Seattle coach Jenny Busek is now with the Sacramento Kings, the second female coach in the NBA. We were so impressed with her. One of the smartest guests, basketball minds we've had on the show. So great luck to her. She might need it with that franchise, but I hope she can do well there.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, we love Jenny Busek on the show, and I think you phrased it well. Best of luck in Sacramento. All right, that has been our show. This has been the Boxscore Geek Show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. You can find us on iTunes and Stitcher as the Boxscore Geek Show. Subscribe, upvote. It helps us out. We go live every week, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. We did break our streak, Brian. Usually we aim for 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesdays. We went on Thursday this week, so apologies to all of you listeners for that. But look for us 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. But if you missed the live show, you can catch the recap on channel Nerd Numbers. I think I've given this plea a few times. If you would like to subscribe to channel Nerd Numbers, if we just hit the 100 mark, it really helps us out for things we can do on YouTube. So if you haven't subscribed on YouTube, do that. You'll get a notification whenever these shows are posted. I've been your host, Jay Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers, produced as always by Brian Foster, a.k.a. Boxscore Brian. Co-host in spirit this week, Patrick Minton, you can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. With that, we will see you next week.